It's 1347. Picture medieval Europe, a time of knights and castles, bustling markets and quaint villages. The air is filled with the sounds of blacksmiths hammering away, merchants haggling over prices, and children playing in the streets. Life is tough, but there's a certain charm to it all. Not exactly a picnic, was it? The peasants toiled from dawn till dusk, working the fields, tending to livestock, and trying to eke out a living. The markets were crowded and noisy, filled with the smells of fresh produce, baked goods, and the occasional whiff of something less pleasant. Now add a dash of bubonic plague. Imagine the sudden onset of fever, chills, and excruciating pain, swollen lymph nodes or buboes appearing in the armpits, neck, and groin. The once lively streets now filled with the cries of the afflicted. Talk about ruining the ambience. The bustling markets and lively villages quickly turned into scenes of chaos and despair. People were terrified, not knowing how the disease spread or how to protect themselves. The social fabric of medieval Europe was unraveling at an alarming rate. This wasn't your average sniffle, mind you. The plague doctors, with their eerie beak masks filled with aromatic herbs, became a common sight. They did their best to treat the sick, but their efforts were often in vain. The medical knowledge of the time was simply no match for the virulence of the plague. The Black Death, as it was aptly named, stormed through Europe like a rampaging boar in a china shop. It spread with terrifying speed, leaving a trail of death and devastation in its wake. Entire towns and villages were wiped out, and the once thriving cities became ghost towns. It arrived via fleas on rats, hitching a ride on trading ships from the east. These ships, laden with goods and spices, unknowingly carried the deadly cargo. The rats, infested with fleas carrying the Yersinia pestis bacterium, disembarked at ports across Europe, spreading the plague far and wide. Within a few years, a third of Europe was pushing up daisies. The death toll was staggering, and the sheer number of bodies overwhelmed the burial grounds. Mass graves became a common sight, and the once peaceful graveyards were now filled with the stench of death. The Grim Reaper was working overtime, and his scythe needed a good sharpening. Death became an ever-present reality, and the fear of the plague permeated every aspect of life. Art and literature of the time reflected this grim reality, with macabre depictions of death and the afterlife becoming increasingly common. Families were torn apart, with loved ones succumbing to the disease in a matter of days. The church, a cornerstone of medieval life, offered solace and hope, but even the clergy were not immune. Prayers and processions became daily rituals as people sought divine intervention to end the suffering. The economic impact was equally devastating. Trade routes were disrupted, and the labor force was decimated. With so many lives lost, fields went untilled, and businesses shuttered. The once thriving economy ground to a halt, and the survivors faced a harsh and uncertain future. Yet, amidst the darkness, there were glimmers of resilience. Art, literature, and music of the period began to reflect the collective trauma and the indomitable human spirit. Stories of survival, hope, and renewal emerged, offering a glimpse of light in the darkest of times. Today, as we walk through the bustling streets of modern Europe, it's hard to imagine the horrors of the past. The resilience and strength of those who lived through the Black Death have shaped the world we know today. Their stories remind us of the fragility of life and the enduring power of the human spirit. Advances in medical science and public health have come a long way since the days of the plague doctors. We now have the knowledge and tools to combat such diseases, but the lessons of the past remain ever relevant. Vigilance, compassion, and resilience are as important today as they were in 1347. So as we gather with our loved ones and celebrate the joys of life, let us remember the trials and tribulations of those who came before us. Their legacy is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and a reminder that, even in the face of unimaginable adversity, we can endure and thrive. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Until next time, stay curious and stay resilient. Imagine waking up with a fever so high you could bake bread on your forehead. Then, picture painful, swollen lymph nodes called buboes erupting in your armpits and groin. Charming, right? But wait, there's more. The Black Death wasn't satisfied with just a fever and some unsightly lumps. It also treated its victims to vomiting, diarrhea, and a delightful little side dish of gangrene. The cherry on top, victims often turned black before shuffling off this mortal coil. Hence the name, the Black Death. Catchy, isn't it? Catchy, isn't. Now you'd think with a disease this nasty, people would be clamoring for a scientific explanation. You'd be wrong. Medieval folks were big on blaming everything on God, the devil, or their neighbor's pet goat. "The Jews are poisoning the wells," some cried. "It's God's punishment for our sins," others wailed. The poor planets got blamed for being in the wrong zodiac sign. Nobody seemed to notice the rats scurrying about, covered in infected fleas. They were too busy accusing each other of witchcraft and heresy. Medieval medical marvels, cures that were worse than the disease. The medieval period was a time of great mystery and superstition, especially when it came to medicine. The so-called cures and treatments often did more harm than good, leaving patients worse off than before. Let's dive into some of the most bizarre and downright dangerous medical practices of the time. So, how did the brilliant medical minds of the time combat this epidemic? The Black Death, for instance, was one of the most devastating pandemics in human history, wiping out a significant portion of the population. Medieval doctors, with their limited understanding of disease and infection, resorted to some truly outlandish methods in their desperate attempts to save lives. Hold on to your hats, or your leeches, as the case may be. One of the most common treatments was leech therapy. Leeches were believed to balance the humours in the body by sucking out the bad blood. This practice was based on the ancient Greek theory of humorism, which posited that the body was governed by 4 humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile. An imbalance in these humours was thought to cause illness. Their cures were as wacky as a bucket full of ferrets. Medieval physicians often relied on a mix of superstition, religion, and rudimentary science to concoct their remedies. They believed that diseases were caused by everything from imbalanced humours to evil spirits and planetary alignments. As a result, their treatments ranged from the bizarre to the downright dangerous. Bloodletting was all the rage. This practice involved cutting a patient and allowing their blood to drain out, sometimes using leeches, as mentioned earlier. The idea was to remove the bad blood and restore balance to the body. However, this often led to severe blood loss, infection, and even death. Despite its dangers, bloodletting remained a popular treatment for centuries. Because draining a sick person of blood is always a good idea, right? The irony is that while doctors were trying to cure their patients, they were often making them weaker and more susceptible to other illnesses. Bloodletting was used to treat a wide range of ailments, from fevers to headaches, but it rarely, if ever, provided any real benefit. Then there were the potions made from things like crushed emeralds, which were believed to have magical healing properties. These potions were often expensive and difficult to obtain, making them accessible only to the wealthy. The belief in the curative powers of precious stones was rooted in the idea that their rarity and beauty were indicative of divine favor. Powdered unicorn horn, good luck finding that one, was another popular ingredient in medieval remedies. Unicorns, of course, are mythical creatures, but that didn't stop people from believing in their existence and the miraculous properties of their horns. Apothecaries would often use the horns of other animals like narwhals and pass them off as unicorn horns to desperate patients. And wait for it, human excrement. Yes, you read that right. Some medieval doctors believed that consuming human waste could cure various ailments. This practice was based on the idea that the body could be rebalanced by ingesting substances that were thought to contain healing properties. Needless to say, this often led to severe illness and infection. Yes, you read that right. The use of human excrement in medicine is a testament to the desperation and lack of understanding that characterized medieval medical practices. People were willing to try anything, no matter how repulsive or dangerous, in the hope of finding a cure. People thought drinking a nice tall glass of poop would cure the plague. Spoiler alert, it didn't. In fact, these so-called cures often exacerbated the problem, spreading disease and causing more harm than good. The history of medieval medicine is a fascinating and often horrifying glimpse into the lengths people will go to in their quest for health and healing. While we've come a long way since then, it's important to remember the lessons of the past and continue to strive for better, more effective treatments in the future. Superstitions and scapegoats. When in doubt, blame the other. Superstitions ran wilder than a banshee at a buffet. In medieval times, when the world was a dark and mysterious place, people often turned to the supernatural to explain the unexplainable. The unknown was a breeding ground for fear, and fear, in turn, bred superstition. People wore amulets of dried toads, carried lucky charms, and clung to any talisman they believed could ward off evil. These objects, often bizarre and macabre, were thought to hold magical properties that could protect them from unseen forces. They prayed to every saint they could think of, hoping for divine intervention. The church was a beacon of hope in these dark times, and people flocked to it, seeking solace and protection. The air was thick with the scent of incense and the murmur of desperate prayers. If that failed, there was always good old-fashioned scapegoating. When prayers and charms didn't work, the blame had to fall somewhere. It was easier to point fingers than to accept the harsh reality of their situation. Jews, foreigners, and the generally unpopular were accused of spreading the plague. These groups were easy targets, already marginalized and misunderstood. Accusations flew like arrows, and the atmosphere was charged with suspicion and hostility. They must be doing it on purpose, people reasoned. The idea that someone could be intentionally causing their suffering was both terrifying and strangely comforting. It provided a tangible enemy to fight against, a face to their fear. Never mind that these groups were getting sick and dying at the same rate as everyone else. The truth was inconvenient and often ignored. The plague was an equal opportunity killer, but that didn't fit the narrative of a malevolent force targeting the innocent. Logic was as rare as a sober Irishman on St. Patrick's Day. In the chaos and confusion, reason took a back seat to hysteria. Taverns buzzed with heated debates and wild theories, each more outlandish than the last. The Black Death was a terrifying mystery, a shadow that loomed over every village and town. It struck without warning, leaving death and despair in its wake. The sheer scale of the devastation was beyond comprehension. Humans tend to fill vacuums of knowledge with fear and suspicion. In the absence of understanding, fear becomes the default response. The unknown is a fertile ground for the seeds of paranoia, and in medieval times, those seeds grew into a tangled web of superstition and blame. Medieval doctors, with their beaked masks and rudimentary understanding of disease, were as much a part of the problem as the solution. Their treatments were often more harmful than helpful, and their inability to cure the plague only fueled the fire of fear. Rituals and exorcisms became commonplace, as people desperately sought to rid themselves of the evil they believed was causing their suffering. These ceremonies, filled with chanting and incense, were a last-ditch effort to reclaim some sense of control. Entire villages were abandoned as people fled in terror, hoping to outrun the invisible menace. The landscape was dotted with ghost towns, eerie reminders of the lives that had been lost to the plague. Art and literature of the time reflected the pervasive fear of death. Skeletons and grim reapers became common motifs, a stark representation of the ever-present threat. The macabre imagery served as both a warning and a coping mechanism. Yet amidst the darkness, there were also acts of incredible kindness and bravery. Neighbors helped each other, risking their own lives to care for the sick. These moments of humanity shone like beacons of hope in a sea of despair. Slowly, communities began to rebuild. The resilience of the human spirit proved stronger than the plague. People came together, united by their shared suffering and determination to survive. The plague also sparked a thirst for knowledge. Scholars and scientists began to question old beliefs and seek new understanding. This quest for knowledge laid the groundwork for future advancements in medicine and science. As the plague finally receded, there was a renewed appreciation for life. Festivals and celebrations became more vibrant, a testament to the resilience and joy of the human spirit. The darkness had passed, and with it came a new dawn of hope and renewal. In the end, the story of the Black Death is not just one of fear and superstition, but also of resilience and hope. It is a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can find a way to endure and overcome.